Hello, everybody. My name is Brandon Adams. Welcome into Cover 4 Live, presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. Happy to also tonight have Connor Riley, Mike Griffith, Jeff Sintel, who's dressed like a Bible salesman. We're glad to have all of you with us this evening as we get ready to talk about Georgia and Tennessee coming up on Saturday. And Jeff, I do have to ask here just really quick before we get into the topic at hand. I know you addressed before the show the idea that everyone would be wearing ties. Are you disappointed tonight to find out that you're the only one going with the neckwear here this evening?
No, not really, because I'm the only one that meets expectations every time on every one of these shows. I have a plan. I stick to that plan. I execute it, much like the Georgia Bulldogs on Saturday.
Yeah, listen, I'm going to respect that, Jeff. I think you were worth waiting for on that one. Very, very impressive all the way. The way around. We got four big topics to get into on tonight's show. I want to begin with this one, and let me set it up this way. You know, if you go back and look at the history of Georgia football, especially during the era in which I was growing up, the Tennessee game was a big game for Georgia for all the wrong reasons. It was a game in which Georgia just had a very hard time winning. A couple of games that come to mind, 1998, the first time ESPN's College Game Day came to Athens and Georgia lost in pretty awful fashion to a Tennessee team that went on to win the national championship. When Georgia finally broke a long losing streak against Tennessee in 2000, it was, at least to my mind, the only time that Georgia fans have ever torn down the goalpost at Sanford Stadium. Then the following year was the Hobnail Boot game, which, believe it or not, is now 19 years ago. But nonetheless, things in the history of Georgia-Tennessee started to change after that. This was once, in other words, a very real rivalry with very strong feelings on both sides. In recent years, Tennessee has just not been very good, and therefore, when Georgia has played Tennessee, either in Athens, where they'll play this Saturday, or in Knoxville, in some respects, it just sort of felt like another game. I personally have not felt that way this week. To me, the Georgia-Tennessee rivalry kind of feels like it's back a little bit. I would say this feels like the biggest game between these two teams in years. Mike, you know both sides really well. You lived in Knoxville for a long time. Do you agree with me that the Georgia-Tennessee rivalry is back?
Oh, yeah. I don't think it ever went away. And all you got to do is look on the recruiting trail. You know, Tennessee's got 25 guys from the state of Georgia. I know Wanya Morris is a guy that, Centel's intel tells me that Georgia backed off on, but he's a 5-star and he came out of the state of Georgia. Very talented guy. 4 years ago, 2016, Tennessee had won 10 games in a row coming in here for Kirby Smart's first year. And we all remember the Hail Mary between the hedges. That was a game that vaulted Tennessee into the top 10. And now 4 years later, Jeremy Pruitt, with a win over Georgia on Saturday, could get Tennessee back in the top 10. Now, funny thing happened since then. Georgia's been ranked in the top 10 themselves 50 consecutive weeks, which is bettered only by Alabama and Clemson. So, but yeah, there's no question. Tennessee is, they have not taken the target off of Georgia's back. Tennessee coaches are judged by what they do against Alabama, Florida, and Georgia. So it's a very important win very important game for Jeremy Pruitt. This would be an important win for him.
So, Jeff, I agree with almost, or at least a lot of what Mike said, with the exception of the fact that the Georgia-Tennessee rivalry didn't go anywhere. Jeff, in my mind, this has not felt like a big game for a number of years, and a lot of that's just due to the fact that, Tennessee has struggled a bit. Where do you come down on this topic? Jeff?
Hold on a second. See, pre-show Cover 4 Live, right? This is not Florida. This is not Alabama, right? I'm just getting my bearings, because you guys remember the recent Star Wars movie where Luke Skywalker hears the sentence and he said, everything you just said in that sentence is that's kind of how I feel of what my man Mike said there. I don't know how this can be a rivalry. Georgia's won the last 9 out of the last 12. I think 29, 26, and 41. Those were the point spreads in each of the last 3 games. And even 2 of those were in Rocky Top in Neyland Stadium. I think Tennessee is making the march to becoming maybe the second best team in the East or the third best team in the East. But, brother, folks, recruiting trail, all those 3 stars that Tennessee filled up early in the 2021 class, this ain't a rivalry, brother, at least not yet.
Well, no, wait a minute. I want to be clear on something. So you guys are telling me that Georgia Tech's not a rival because they haven't been competitive. Is that the logic that you're applying here, Jeff?
I think this statement Brandon used was, he said, it's a rivalry again. It's there. I don't think it's back to what it was when Georgia was facing Tennessee, because the way this thing shifted is it was Tennessee dominance and then it was Georgia dominance, or at least Georgia taking a lot of the wins. And it got to the point where, remember that Brandon mentioned the Rocky Top game where everybody stormed the field, and I think there was something like, give or take, 1,200 Nokia cell phones. Brandon, I can plug a company that's no longer around, right?
That would be okay. Yes.
That were found on the ground. I give it everybody. I just don't know. I mean, like, man, I guess I would be.
So we're having a little bit of
we're
having a little bit of a signal issue with Jeff. Let me give Jeff a timeout. We'll let him figure that out. But Connor, one of the things that Jeff brings up there is the idea of why would this be a rivalry now, given the fact that Georgia has won recent years. I think the answer to that is actually pretty tangible in that Cade Mays has now switched teams. He used to play for Georgia. Now he plays for Tennessee. I think that has added some juice to this game. I think it's also true that Jim Chaney's presence, year two, of course, it's not as brand new as it once was, but year two for Jim Chaney as the Tennessee offensive coordinator, the former Georgia offensive coordinator. When he left to go to Knoxville, there was a lot of celebrating. There was a lot of big bank take little bank type tweets about, Tennessee supposedly, orchestrating some coup to get Jim Chaney to come to Knoxville. So, I mean, I think some of that kind of stuff, some of the off the field drama is kind of what adds to the intrigue for Georgia and Tennessee. And some of that what makes this feel like a bigger game this upcoming weekend. Do you agree?
Yeah. So to sort of elaborate on, I think the point you're making there, I believe right now that Ole Miss, Mississippi State, the Egg Bowl is the best rivalry in college sports. Mm-hmm. Those teams aren't competing for national
Wait
champions.
a minute.
Let me make my point.
Let him finish, Mike. Let him finish, Mike.
This isn't a vice presidential debate. Let me finish. The reason it is the best rivalry in sports, it's not because they're competing for championships. It's not because of the stakes. It's because both of those sides, 365 days a year, absolutely despise each other. There is real hate in that rivalry. I think hate drives rivalries. It fuels rivalries. I think it makes them better. One of the reasons the Georgia-Florida rivalry is so great right now is because I believe there's legitimate hate between the Georgia side and Kirby Smart and the Florida side and Dan Mullen. I think you're starting to get there with Tennessee. I don't know if it's ever going to reach that Florida-Georgia level right now because of the sort of similarities between Kirby Smart and Jeremy Pruitt. And those guys, I think, they both want to beat each other's brains in, but I do think there's a lot of mutual respect there between the two. But I think the Cade Mays stuff, the Jim Chaney stuff, if Tennessee is able to get some more success on the recruiting trail and take some guys that Georgia really wants, I think those sort of aspects sort of bring the heat on this rivalry back up. And one of the things BA has sort of talked about in recent years when playing, like, say, a Florida or an Auburn, it doesn't matter what the final score is, just win that game. This Tennessee game in recent years, I don't think has been treated in that sort of same way. You're looking for style points against them. But BA, I asked you this week, with this Tennessee team coming in here and sort of the weather and everything around it, is it just win this game week and move on and enjoy the victory?
No, I think there's a little bit more to it than that. One of the things I've talked about this week on Dog Nation Daily is in these kinds of games in recent years, Georgia has actually not fared particularly well. You look at their last 5 instances being at home as a double-digit favorite. Georgia's just 1-4 versus the spread in those games, most of that happening in 2019. Think Notre Dame closer than it was supposed to be. Kentucky closer than it was supposed to be. Texas A&M closer than it was supposed to be. A lot of the audience would say, well, I'm not betting that game. I don't care. But how you perform in comparison to expectations is generally a pretty good predictor for how you're going to do in future games. So let's look at Georgia right now. Number originally 14. It's actually fallen a little bit since then, I believe. How Georgia fares against Tennessee in comparison to expectations. Can they win by 2 touchdowns or more? The way that the gambling experts have said they're supposed to. If they can, I think that speaks to Georgia's chances of beating Alabama the following week. If Georgia's scuffling against Tennessee, finding a way to only win this game by a narrow margin, listen, you still take it in a year when you're playing a rigorous grind of a schedule, all the wins, you'll collect as many as you can. But in terms of using this as a data point to predict a win against Alabama, obviously that becomes much more difficult to do at that point.
Right. And I think we even look back last year against some of those teams later in the season, Auburn, Texas A&M, teams Georgia was clearly better than, but they struggled to beat them. And ultimately that came back to bite them when they played a very talented LSU team. I think if this Georgia team comes out on Saturday, they're clearly more talented than Tennessee is. And if they're able to sort of put them away and cover that Vegas gambling spread, which I believe they have done in their first 2 games, and you know what they're saying is good teams win, great teams cover. I think a win and a win by 14 points, 14 plus points, where they look impressive and they dominate a team that's gotten a lot of talk this week, this Tennessee team. I think that only, like BA says, sort of helps their chances against Alabama.
Mike, one of the things that Connor said that I agree with, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, one of the things that works against Georgia-Tennessee as a rivalry in comparison to Florida and Auburn, I think Kirby truly, genuinely, authentically does not like Dan Mullen, does not like Gus Malzahn, which makes him A-OK in my book. But in the case of Jeremy Pruitt, these are obviously fierce competitors that do want to beat each other. But I don't get the sense that Kirby dislikes Jeremy Pruitt. In fact, even given a reason to, the way the Cade Mays thing played out, Smart essentially just sort of shrugged it off and said, hey, coaches are going to do what they're going to do. I actually take him at his word when he says that. So that's the one thing I believe that works against this rivalry is these two coaches have a little bit more of a kinship than they do an authentic rivalry. What do you think about that?
Yeah, maybe, but he doesn't like Jim Chaney. We know that. Now, there is some animosity.
Wait,
there.
how do we know that?
There wasn't a good parting. The whole Justin Fields left wasn't handled real well. I don't think Kirby was real pleased with Jim Chaney in the way that Justin Fields situation was handled. I mean, Jim Chaney was the offensive coordinator, and he was left to manage Justin Fields, as well as Luke Ford, a guy that ended up transferring out that Chaney was involved in recruiting. So there was some animosity there. I talked to people in Tennessee. Jim Chaney, not a big fan of Kirby Smart. Let's face it, Kirby's a tough guy to work for. So is Jeremy Pruitt. That's why Jeremy's only got 2 guys left off his original staff. So I think that there is some animosity between the programs. I think, the fact that they recruit against one another, they're border states. I remember covering Tennessee's Big Orange Caravan in Atlanta, telling Philip Fulmer, hey, man, this is something else. You're having a Tennessee Big Orange Caravan out of state. And he said, we don't look at this as out of state. We consider Atlanta part of the state of Tennessee. He said, you go back and look at our national championship, Jamal Lewis, Deion Grant, Cozy Coleman, Fred White, Steve Johnson. They had 5 or 6 Georgia guys that they won a national title with. And the minute that they can get back in the state of Georgia, they will. So I think this is an important game for Georgia to win and cover. And, Kirby is 6-1 at home against top 25 teams. But that one victory or that one loss was against Tennessee 34-31 when Josh Dobbs found Juwan Jennings. Just 2016, just 4 years ago. Wasn't that long ago, guys.
It certainly feels like a long time ago, though, when you compare the state of the Georgia program then to what it's certainly been after that. And, Jeff, Mike's right. Obviously Tennessee views the Peach State as part of its recruiting soil. And when it comes to sort of plan B options for Georgia, Tennessee has certainly cleaned up on some of those guys in recent years.
Yeah, I guess when it comes back to the whole rivalry topic, and hopefully I'm going to come across with not so choppy signals anymore. But to me, I always look at rivalries and big games is if Team A, I'm going to say Georgia's Team A here, can they not play well and still beat Team B? I think Georgia can still do that. Can Team B still not play well, not and still beat Team A? I don't think Tennessee, I guess, is just me like Cade Mays drama. There's some of this coming in there as well. I don't know. I mean, I just keep remembering, you're only as good as your last 10, 14, 15 games. Indiana was a slobber knocker there for Tennessee. They lose to Georgia State. They lose to BYU last year. Listen, it may be coach of the year material here for Jeremy Pruitt turning around Tennessee so fast, but I don't know if he's with a top 5 program like Georgia yet.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's going to be very interesting to see. I mean, I guess when it comes to the game itself, I said this on our Dog Nation Happy Hour show this afternoon, Connor, that as the week went on last week, speaking as a fan who wants Georgia to win, I was growing more confident in Georgia's ability to do so as the week wore on. I guess I find myself going a little bit the other direction this week, which is not to say that I think that Tennessee is going to win, because I don't think they're going to. But this game being a little closer than the average Georgia fan wants. Like I saw one of our Facebook viewers a moment ago said he had Georgia winning by 21 points on Saturday. I have to admit, as someone who wants that result, I don't quite have that level of confidence about, this Saturday. I do take some of Kirby Smart's statements fairly seriously this week that, Jeremy Pruitt's teams are always going to be pretty good defensively. I do think this is a pretty good Tennessee offensive line in a year in which actually the SEC East has a handful of pretty good offensive lines when you see what Kentucky's doing right now. I think overall, I do find this game to maybe be a little bit more challenging as we get closer to it than I would probably prefer it to be.
Yeah, and I also wonder maybe what impact the weather has on Saturday. It's looking like there's going to be some rain, but that might be more in the second half than the first half. Ultimately, I think for me, from what this game comes down to aspect is what most games against Georgia do. Can the opposing team run the football? Can Tennessee, which has the number 2 rushing offense through 2 games, which admittedly is not a big sample size, but with this offensive line, if they can run the ball, that's going to keep Tennessee in the game. That's going to allow them to hang around and make plays in this game. If they're not able to run the ball early and they're not really able to run the ball successfully, I think you're going to see what you saw against Auburn last week where, if they fall behind a little bit, it suddenly becomes so much harder to win because now you're turning to Jarrett Garantano and asking him to throw to wide receivers who are much worse than what Auburn had a week ago. And we saw what the Georgia defensive backs did against the likes of Seth Williams and Anthony Schwartz. And so I just wonder, is this Tennessee team, as good as this offensive line is and as good as they've been talked about, are they actually going to be able to get out there and do it and run on this Georgia defensive front? And if they're not able to do it early, I think we could see a repeat of what we saw last week.
Mike, you think this was easy for Georgia on Saturday?
No, I don't think easy is the right word. I think they win convincingly in the end, Brandon. You think about last year's game, and it was 14-13 with 2 minutes left in the second quarter. I mean, Tennessee and Jeremy Pruitt, they can scheme. Jim Chaney's a good coach. He knows what Kirby wants to do on defense. He's got an adequate offensive line, good enough offensive line that, I don't think Georgia's going to be able to tee off. I'm not sure they're going to make a living running the ball. I know they average like 182 yards. I think about 100 yards might be the over-under there. I don't expect a big rushing performance. But I think what matters is what is Georgia doing on offense? Because if Georgia has the lead, to Connor's point, that enables Kirby and Dan Lanning to dial up some things and get more aggressive and really puts Jarrett Garantano in a position where he has to make plays. And that's not his strength. Tennessee's not good enough on the perimeter to beat Georgia. But if you let Tennessee stay close, because your walk-on JUCO feel-good story quarterback is having a tough game because of weather elements or because somebody decides to cover the short passes and makes them try and throw deep, then you could have some trouble. So it's going to be interesting to see early on how Stetson Bennett does when he's challenged to throw the ball more than 15 or 20 yards downfield at a time.
It is Cover 4 Live, presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. I'm Brandon Adams. That's Mike Griffith. Connor Riley here. Jeff Sintel back on the way again in a couple of minutes, too. We got a lot more to talk about when it comes to Georgia and Tennessee this upcoming Saturday. And really, Georgia at this point of the season, as we move really in a crucial stretch, continuing to move through that crucial stretch over the course of the next couple of weeks. It's all brought to you tonight by our friends at the Georgia Farm Bureau. And listen, Georgia Farm Bureau stands in support of the agricultural community here in the state of Georgia. What you think about all the food on our tables, the stuff that we enjoy to eat, the stuff that I feed to my children, the stuff that helps keep me strong and vibrant. So much of that food is provided by farmers right here in the state of Georgia. And I love the fact that Georgia Farm Bureau supports them. And one of the ways they do that is with the I Farm, I Vote campaign. I think it's a really cool thing. Through I Farm, I Vote, what Georgia Farm Bureau is doing is really stepping up and providing a voice, a platform for Georgia's farmers to have their voices heard when it comes to a lot of issues related to the upcoming election at both the local level, the state level, the federal level. The I Farm, I Vote campaign gives Georgia's farmers a chance to be heard on issues like that. So if you are a Georgia farmer, or if you want to find out how Georgia Farm Bureau is supporting the local agricultural community, please check out this website. It's ifarmivotegA.com. ifarmivotegA.com. You can get some unbiased info on all the upcoming elections, state, local, federal. You can hear interviews with candidates and really find yourself informed about the issues that affect the agricultural community here in the state of Georgia. Please make sure you check out the I Farm, I Vote campaign. Once again, the website, ifarmivotegA.com. That's ifarmivotegA.com. All right, one of the fun things last week about Georgia and Auburn is I think we saw some maybe under-the-radar names emerge as big players for Georgia. For instance, on defense, I don't know that people expected Adam Anderson to have quite as big a game as he had last week, really getting after Bo Nix a lot, certainly making life very difficult on Nix there in that game. And it makes you curious about what might be on the way to come here this week against the Vols. So for topic 2 here on our Cover 4 Live broadcast presented by Georgia Farm Bureau, Mike, if I ask you to look along the Georgia roster, maybe an under-the-radar name that we're not talking enough about, who could really bust forth this week, really on either side of the ball? Who comes to mind for you?
Oh, probably Kenny McIntosh. I talked a lot about Kenny during the off season, and of course we had some fun with that. Everybody knows that I think he's a really talented guy, but with James Cook's injury situation, he's questionable for this game. He suffered a shoulder injury. Kirby said he could have come back, but he's kind of backtracked off of that now. He said he's been in a non-contact jersey and he's been day to day. So I expect Kenny McIntosh to get some opportunities. There were some stats recently put out where Kenny was one of the top 10 backs in terms of most elusive in the SEC. Of course, John Emery at LSU was number one. Can't make Georgia fans feel too good, but Kenny McIntosh has done a lot on kick returns. We've seen a lot more speed than I think a lot of people have seen. And Kenny's also a very adept pass catcher. So I think he fills those James Cook shoes well in that single back when they want to throw to the back, maybe run some sprint draws.
Mike, you mentioned the kick return. Isn't it interesting that again last week we had one of these heads of steam from Kenny McIntosh, much the same way it's shown in the Arkansas game when he gets a chance to return one. In the modern day, kick returns are just not much a part of as much a part of the sport as they used to be. But man, McIntosh really gives you that little bit of a hiccup when you see him take off running, because he moves forward with a burst that makes you think he's going all the way to the house.
Yeah, he took a pretty good shot too. The more valuable he becomes to the offense, I think maybe we don't see him quite as much on kick return. That's a dangerous spot to put a skill guy. I know that Kirby likes to use his starters there, and I know Connors did a recent story about Zamir White still shining on those special teams, had that block punt in the last game. But I look for Kenny McIntosh in general to be a bigger part of the offense, BA. And a guy that you talked a lot about in the offseason is Trey McKitty. This is his first game. I think Trey has a chance to be a real impact player. And again, Stetson Bennett needs guys on the intermediate range and that tight end throw. It's such a security blanket. And McKitty is a really talented guy that I think can present some matchup problems right away.
Jeff, how about you? If you think about an under-the-radar name, somebody we're not talking enough about. We saw some of those guys a week ago. Mike makes his case for Kenny McIntosh. I'm sure we'll talk more about Trey McKitty, just given the possibility that he might come back on Saturday. Another name that maybe comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I think for me, the names to look at there is I like maybe the tight end position there. I don't know if it's McKitty. It might be Darnell Washington. I got another back in mind that's also looking pretty sporty. I think Kendall Milton is a guy that's also looking pretty sporty, looking in that the way he ran the ball in that first game. I thought it woke up the echoes of a lot of what Georgia wants to do with its show dog running backs. The other name I think about, and I guess this is my answer, is I think of Demetrius Robertson. I think the number 3 wide receiver, the alternate wide receiver. I think Tennessee will pay a little bit more attention to Kearis Jackson. And who is that steps up? Is it Demetrius Robertson? Is it Jermaine Burton? That's what I'll be looking to see on Saturday, as a guy that kind of steps up and becomes a bigger factor than most might expect.
So let me come back at you on D-Rob here for a moment, because I've jokingly said on Dog Nation Daily that for 3 consecutive off seasons, I've picked Demetrius Robertson to be a breakout player, and I haven't quite gotten what I've wanted from D-Rob as of yet. But here'd be my concern right now, if you're wanting to tout D-Rob as your under-the-radar guy for this Saturday or the next couple of weeks. I think what you're seeing with Kearis Jackson is real. Kearis Jackson seemed very comfortable in this Todd Monken offense before the start of the season. The results have spoken for themselves thus far. The way in which Jermaine Burton has been treated by Kirby Smart in Georgia thus far, essentially unquestioned as a starter, I think you have to say that Burton's status is real at the moment. Obviously, we know what George Pickens is. At a certain point in time, this is not the situation a year ago where there was a lot of free substitution, guys rotating in, guys rotating out, and really you couldn't tell one guy from the next. Georgia still likes to substitute at that spot, but I get the sense that the Pickens, the Kearises, the Burtons of the world, I would say Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint is very close to being in that same discussion. I get the sense that their playing time is so assured at the moment that other capable players may be elbowed out just a bit. And I guess I worry a little bit about D-Rob maybe being one of those guys. What do you think?
Well, I think a lot of times in football, I think you're right, Brendan, that if both guys are equal and both guys are giving you about the same thing, you go with the younger guy because that will give you more upside and you go with that youth. I think what I'm looking for there is maybe that third wide receiver type, but I guess I'll come back to Demetrius Robertson because that's what I was as I was kind of riding the waves of my internet connection earlier, is that I think Georgia's got a lot of players that are juniors and seniors, 2017, 2018 classes. And those are the guys that, by and large, win this football game. Georgia has kind of marinated its roster to championship level, where the 17s are seniors, the 18s are juniors, and now the sophomores are really sporty second-year players. I think it's going to be a lot of those veteran capable guys. Maybe a Devontae Wyatt is a guy that maybe might blow your skirt up a little bit, as a guy this week that gets the pass rush that Adam Anderson did a week ago. I think it's just more veteran, 2-year, 3-year SEC players. And we got to go all the way back with D-Rob, man. He's fast. He's played a lot of football. Maybe he's a gadget guy. I know some people might throw a shoe at the television screen if Todd Monken runs a jet sweep and it actually works for his offense in 2020. But I just look to those veteran talented guys that will get a chance to shine on this stage.
I hope you're right, Jeff. I'd love nothing more than to see D-Rob have that kind of opportunity. Connor, who would be your name?
Well, D-Rob was going to be my name, and getting to talk to him last night, I don't know if he's going to be do what Kyrus did, but I think there would be a point this season where Georgia needs Demetrius to make a play, and personally, I'm rooting for him to do it. Right now, he is tied for second on the team in catches. Now, he's only turned those 6 catches into 39 yards, and from a player of his athleticism, you're looking for a little bit more. I'm going to go to the defensive side of the ball. I don't know if we're calling him underrated, but we're not talking about him as much as we did Azeez Ojulari, Adam Anderson, Jermaine Johnson, some of the other outside linebackers there. But Nolan Smith, you look at the guys who have given Cade Mays some trouble as a pass rusher, and he's had some troubles in those last couple of games, Baylor last year in the Sugar Bowl and then Missouri last week. It's not necessarily the speed guys that have given him problems. It's those technicians, those power players coming off the edge. I believe Nolan Smith does that on Saturday. And maybe I'm reading too much into this. Maybe this is reckless speculation. But after the NCAA first denied Cade Mays' waiver, I have the tweet pulled up on my phone right now.
Grass is green.
Nolan Smith had tweeted, "The grass is not always greener on the other side." Nolan Smith is a leader. He's a guy who very much, all in, buy into this program. And this is, again, reckless speculation, put the flashers up and everything. But I don't think he liked what Cade Mays, a guy we thought of as a potential leader for Georgia last year, did in going to Tennessee. I think Nolan might take this game a little bit personally. They've matched up against Cade Mays in practices before. Look for Nolan Smith to maybe be Georgia's best pass rusher on Saturday.
So, Connor, I talked about this on our happy hour broadcast a little earlier. T. Martin was on an Alabama radio station interview this week, and he was quoted by AL.com. And he was talking about the Georgia defense, and he was just saying the sort of general platitudes that coaches kind of throw out there. But it was the specific description of, this is a pressure defense. This is a relentless defense. This is a defense that gets after you. And obviously Nolan Smith would be a part of that equation. And for me, that's not really the way that Georgia had been described a year ago. They'd be more like an anaconda that sort of suffocates you, but not necessarily, sort of a relentless attacker. And yet T. Martin, and I don't know that he necessarily means what he says, but still words themselves have meaning. And those are the words that he chose to use. So when I think about being excited about watching Georgia's defense again on Saturday against what is, I think, objectively just a better offensive line than what Auburn has, if it is true that Nolan Smith's getting around the edge, if Adam Anderson's doing some more of what he did, if Azeez and those guys, when they're getting a chance to play, if they're kind of doing some of that same kind of stuff too, then that is something that you take with you for the rest of the season. That Georgia has specifically improved in an area in which I believe was deficient a year ago.
Right, and the point Mike made earlier about the offense sort of playing into that. Last year, I think if the Georgia offense only got up by a touchdown or two, they weren't necessarily willing to be all that aggressive. Obviously, the Auburn game, they're up 24-0. But even you look back at that Arkansas game, when they get up 20-10, that's when they really started to turn up the pressure on that Arkansas offense. And I wonder if maybe this year, because they know they have the talent and the personnel to do it, if they do get staked, even a smaller lead, they're up 10-0, they're up 13-3 early in the game, they might be, okay, guys, hey, we can turn up the pressure a little bit here. We have the pass rushers. We have the cornerbacks in the secondary who can hold up in man-to-man coverage. And I think because of that, because of the defensive personnel, if this Georgia offense gives them a chance to play into that pressuring style, I think they're absolutely going to take it this season.
And Mike, let me, before we change this topic, go back to what you mentioned before about Trey McKitty. I don't want to make myself out to sound like a coach here, but like one of the things I believe is true is that I think sometimes we have a tendency to think when you got 4 guys running passing routes that they're all 4 equally capable of catching the ball or all 4 equally likely to be thrown to. I think a lot of times that's not the case. And I would say that one of the reasons why Georgia tight ends haven't caught more balls in recent years is for whatever reason, they just weren't going to be that primary route on a play, that secondary route on a play. They were just more of a dump off, or in some cases, maybe even just a dummy route. But given the fact that a guy like McKitty, who has caught balls before, can kind of work in that flex end position, all of a sudden his matchup, his abilities compared to the guy that might be guarding him might be the kind of, route exploitation opportunity that someone like, Todd Monken would want to take advantage of, and they might throw the ball to more. I'm not saying he's a Kyle Pitts or even a Isaac Nott. I'm not saying he's any of that kind of stuff, but I do think that he's going to be a guy that once he's healthy, that Georgia is glad that it has.
Yeah, there's no question. I think he's probably the best pass catching tight end that Kirby Smart has had. Certainly more of a threat, more of a mismatch. And I think who you go to has to do with your receiver hierarchy. I mean, let's be honest. If they could go to George Pickens every play, they would, because he's the best receiver on the team. If they could get it to Jermaine Burton more often with his speed, they probably would, provided that he's learned how to run the right routes against coverages. But McKitty is a veteran guy who gives you some mismatch ability. He's played Florida State. Mark Richt speaks highly of him. I think he is this year's version of Lawrence Cager, because he didn't have a good quarterback situation at Florida State. And I think now that he's got a good quarterback situation, he can do a lot of things because of the mismatches that he can create. And because I think he's a guy that Stetson Bennett can find quickly and easily. And, we're this far into the show where, we're just now praising Todd Monken. I think he's the real secret to this offense. I don't think that the offensive line is better than last year's. I don't think Stetson Bennett is better than Jake Fromm. The receivers are probably a slight upgrade. The running back's probably a downgrade to this point. But the real secret is Todd Monken and his play calling. These defenses still don't have a grip on what he's doing. And you can see that on third downs because Stetson hasn't had to go to his second and third progression very often.
I have been happy with Monken thus far, and I can't wait to see where he takes this next. It's Cover 4 Live, presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. We'll keep the conversation going here. Georgia has seemingly proven a decent amount through 2 games, especially when you look at the dismantling of Auburn last Saturday. But there are still unanswered questions as you move forward towards Tennessee this week, and obviously big showdown with Alabama the week after that. So I want to ask each of you what you think Georgia's biggest unanswered question is at the moment. If you don't mind, though, I want to go first on this one because normally I kind of wait and go last. When you look at week 1 against Arkansas, you did see the kind of busted play and Arkansas finds a way to score. And frankly, I don't make much of that. That kind of thing is going to happen. Last week against Auburn, there were a couple of opportunities when I thought that Chad Morris pretty cleverly, just if I can say that word correctly, cleverly, found Anthony Schwartz on kind of a long route. And, Auburn had a chance to connect on that play, just missed. Here's the big unanswered question that I have. If an opposing offense is stymied by the Georgia defense over and over and over again, but what happens if they do hit on a couple of big plays? And what happens to the Georgia offense when it's put into a position where it has to match those big plays? We haven't really seen that happen too much yet because the big plays that Auburn could have had last Saturday, they just missed out on. And for some reason, it's Anthony Schwartz that keeps coming to mind on some of that kind of stuff. But this Saturday, maybe Jared Garantano's not a great quarterback, and certainly the wide receivers for Tennessee aren't as good as they once were a year ago. But he could be capable of hitting 1 or 2 big throws, and 1 or 2 big throws, depending on where they come in the game, suddenly puts more pressure on Stetson Bennett than he's probably faced at any point in time this season. Guys, and I'll let anybody answer this that wants to, my big unanswered question is, what happens then?
Yeah, I think similar. My biggest sort of question is what happens to, I believe what you just summed up, what happens when this offense has to make plays? Right now, first half, you look great out there. Second half against Arkansas, the talent was always sort of going to win out there. But what happens when you're in a situation where you need Stetson Bennett to go out there and make plays for you? Will this Georgia offense be able to do that? Will they, in a pressure situation, will they be able to run the ball well enough to put a drive together and put away a good team, whether that be Tennessee this week, potentially Alabama or Florida in the weeks to come? What happens when they need to make a play in the fourth quarter? That's ultimately, I don't know if we're going to get that answered against Tennessee. I think we might have to wait for Alabama for that. But right now, all things aside, I think that is the biggest question for me when it comes to Georgia this year.
Mike, how about you? Big question still remaining.
Yeah, no explosive plays. I mean, the Kearis Jackson pass was a 49-yarder, and Kearis had to hold up on it. Probably should have been a touchdown pass if it was thrown on target, or if Stetson had the arm strength to get it down there. The longest run of the season is 20 yards. Kirby Smart has said continuously he wants explosive plays. Guys, you got to go back to the Kentucky game last year. I think that was 9 games ago, to find a touchdown run longer than 30 yards from the Georgia backfield. Is Zamir White ultimately the answer? Could Kendall Milton be the guy? I saw him deck that 285-pound. All questions I had about Kendall Milton's toughness was answered on that one run when that Auburn D lineman came up and Milton just put him in the turf. Kenny McIntosh with the foot in the ground and cutting ability. And, even Dejon Edwards looks exciting to me. Are they going to find a running back who can break a run longer than 20 yards? Zamir White has 110 carries in his career. His longest run to date is 29 yards.
Well, I don't know if that's a short distance or not, but I guess my point in responding to all this would be, I think you're right, Mike. They haven't been explosive yet, but I guess the one thing I might disagree on, though, is the idea that they are a substitution away from finding that explosiveness. To me, I expected the Georgia offense to be a work in progress. Thus far, it kind of is. They actually played better last Saturday than I probably thought they were going to. So in other words, I will join you in saying, this is not a super explosive offense right now, and that's probably true, but it's not because I believe they're playing the wrong personnel. I just think in the early stages of the Todd Monken era, who I've been fine with, I think his play calling has actually been pretty good, but this offense was broken badly a year ago. And the idea that it was going to be fixed quickly, and I'm generally speaking a fairly optimistic person, but the idea that the offense was going to be fixed quickly, I just didn't simply believe that was possible.
Yeah, well, it's definitely more efficient, and what we've seen is a lot of efficiency, but we haven't seen the air raid turned up to Todd Monken's standard yet. I don't know if or when JT Daniels gets in the lineup, but that guy's got an NFL arm, and I can tell you George Pickens will catch more than 2 passes when he's in the game. It takes a strong arm to throw the deep out and the deep ball and put it in windows, and we know George Pickens is going to be defended closely, but you've got to get George Pickens involved more often. You can't allow teams to take him away and have only 2 catches in a game. That's bad, and defenses will adjust to that. Guys like Jermaine Burton, those flyers, Arian Smith will be back in a couple weeks. You've got to have a quarterback that can take the top off a defense and go deep. It's going to be interesting to see what happens when that quarterback transition happens. I don't know when. I don't know if it'll happen against Tennessee or Alabama or Florida. I don't know when, but he's there for a reason. And then in the backfield, BA, I think you do have to give some other guys some opportunities. When they signed on at Georgia, no one said you're going to have to wait for Zamir White to leave before you get 5 carries in the game. They were told they were going to have an opportunity to compete, and I think they've looked good and earned more carries. And if Zamir's not breaking long runs, I think you need to give other people chances.
Go ahead, Connor.
Well, one thing on Zamir White, he has 32 carries on this season. He leads the SEC right now in converting those carries, or he leads the SEC in first downs and touchdown conversions, converting essentially 40% of his carries, 13, into first downs or touchdown scenarios. Yes, he might not be breaking off those long runs, but I don't necessarily know right now how much of that is specifically on the running backs and how much of that might be on whether the downfield blocking something that was an issue ago. And it still seems to be, just given they've had some downfield holding penalties that have wiped out plays in the past.
That's fair, Connor. We just don't know because we don't see the other running backs get a chance.
Jeff, how about you? What's your biggest unanswered question right now?
Yeah, I'm trying to maintain my look like a Bible salesman, act like a Bible salesman type persona, but I'm feeling like a Looney Tunes character right now. Listen to all you yokels talk about. I've got an exasperation. I've got I saw it differently, and I got what I need to see differently. And I'm going to give it to you faster than Mike Griffith can make friends on Twitter. 1, when is Mike Griffith going to give Zamir White some due? All I see Zamir White is get better every week. Making guys miss, making the first guy miss, getting those dog yards, getting yards after contact. 1, I'm done with that one. Number 2, I actually had a good thought about that pass that was underthrown to Kearis Jackson. I saw Stetson Bennett basically just flick his wrist, not put a whole lot of oomph in there at all. He just had to trigger the ball out there. I wouldn't grade him a total demerit on that throw. And 3, here's what I want to see differently from Georgia. I want to see Kirby give Monken the reins to build up a big lead at the half and go 29-6 on somebody, and then turn that sucker into 45-10 at the end of the game. I want to see that. I want to see Kirby might give Monken all the power and wherewithal in the world to build the lead. But I think what a lot of Georgia fans want to see is they want to see Georgia take a big lead and not put that luxury sports car into economy mode and keep it into sport mode for 4 quarters.
Yeah, but Jeff, this is what I told my audience this morning on Dog Nation Daily. If the only complaint you have with the Auburn game is that Georgia didn't beat a top 10 by 35 points, then from that standpoint, you're actually doing pretty well. I mean, listen, Auburn looked awful last Saturday against Georgia, but it's not like it was ever, I think, destined to be a dial-us to score type game. I know it feels familiar to fans to see a better first half offensively than a second half. I get that, but you know, I really have very few nits to pick when it comes to the Georgia performance from a week ago.
Yeah, I think the teams that you would look to do that against, unfortunately for Georgia, are on the back half of their schedule. The Mississippi States, that's a team you do that to. Missouri, South Carolina, those are the teams where you take, I think, that 27-6 game and turn it into a 45-10 shellacking. Whereas with last weekend, it was just clear, I think, hey, we can just sit on their throats and just run the clock out, and that'll be enough. A 3-touchdown victory over a top 10 team. I get the point Jeff is making, and eventually I would like to see that as well. But for one game sample size, I don't necessarily know if that's worth criticizing them for.
And Mike, go ahead, Jeff, go ahead.
You know, I think the other thing, and I guess this is unknown, undiscovered country here for a lot. I think a lot of SEC coaches are noticing that this is a grind. They're not going to have a Murray State. They're not going to have a UTC that they can chew up and spit out in the middle of the schedule. I think when they realize they have the lead and they have the game in hand, they need to figure out, okay, I need to get my starters in and out for the next SEC test with no speed bumps or no kind of grace periods in this roster at all. I think it would be kind of fleeting if Georgia would to try and beat Auburn by about 40 points and then find themselves shorthanded with a key player or two for the next game against Tennessee.
And then, Mike, let's go back to Stetson Bennett here before we wrap this topic up. You know, on the one hand, and I think you and I addressed this on Dog Nation Daily this week, that Bennett's going to try to do this Saturday what a couple of SEC quarterbacks actually failed to do last week. KJ Costello was great in week 1 against LSU, could not maintain that week 2 against Arkansas. Bo Nix was pretty good against Kentucky week 1, clearly could not maintain that week 2 against better competition when it comes to Georgia. Stetson Bennett, really, statistically speaking, that was a pretty good performance by Georgia quarterback standards in recent years, what Bennett did last Saturday against Auburn. But now he steps up and has to try to do that, you know, for a second consecutive week. And we'll certainly be watching him closely to see if he can maintain that same level of play. But I get the sense I think he's playing better right now than you think he's playing. I eventually expect JT Daniels to be heard from this year in a Georgia uniform, but you can't even ask the question about replacing Bennett on the basis of the way that he's playing right now.
Well, I don't know. I mean, do you have to lose a game before you change a cornerback or a linebacker or an offensive lineman? Sometimes guys get beat out in practice, right? I mean, 17-28 for 240 yards isn't exactly college football Hall of Fame material, especially when you consider that he missed a wide open John Fitzpatrick earlier in the game. And you know, he's got his limitations. Let's face it. I mean, it's a good story. You know, I get critical of these guys like Zamir White with 2 knee surgeries. Of course, that's a great story. Of course, he's worked hard. But people come to this isn't AYSO soccer. You know, this is Georgia, and running backs are supposed to break 20-yard runs every single game. This is RBU. You can't have someone with 110 carries and not have more than a 30-yard run. There's running backs that could do that running backwards that have played at this university.
How many 30-yard runs is a lot of – I don't even know how many 30-yard runs is a lot. I honestly don't know the answer to that.
Well, I mean, I look in Tennessee's backfield, and both of their running backs have runs of longer than 65 yards. I want to see a home run hitter back there. That's what the head coach says. He doesn't say he wants a plotter and a grinder who gets 5, 6, 7, 9 and runs behind an offensive line and falls forward. He says he wants explosive plays. I say the same thing at the quarterback position. Stetson Bennett has done adequate, and he did good enough to beat Auburn on 17 of 28 for 240 yards. But if you think 17 of 28 for 240 yards is going to beat Alabama, then my aunt's my uncle. I think they need dynamic play at these positions if they're going to win a national championship.
Well, we're not talking about Alabama right now. We're talking about what happened last Saturday against Auburn. Here's what I'm going to tell you. I have no reason to believe if JT Daniels was Georgia's starting quarterback on Saturday, he would have performed better than Stetson Bennett. The reason why I know is because when Daniels was a starter, the Pac-12 level, he frequently did worse against lesser competition. So I have no reason to believe that Daniels,
with the worst
even though
supporting cast,
even
and
though his
bad snaps and a porous
hold
offensive
on, let me
line.
finish, and then I'll let you say whatever you want. Even though his credentials are higher than Bennett, and I myself have said, I think you'll hear from Daniels this season, he frequently played worse than Bennett played last week.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the coaches would disagree with you. That's why he was running with the first team and Bennett was with the fourth team all the way through fall practice.
I don't even know how to respond. I don't even know how to respond to that. I mean,
well, the response is that he was outperforming him in practice, and that's why he was running with the first team with Jamie Newman until Newman transferred. Bennett came in and made the most of his opportunity. They've got a good rhythm. I think he's elusive. I think he brings another element that JT doesn't have right now with his ability to scramble. And I think it's a feel-good story. And to Jeff's point, I think Kirby's playing the long game. You got 8 SEC games left, and if you can win with Stetson Bennett, win with Stetson Bennett. But before long, you're going to have to take the Ferrari out of the garage to win the Grand Prix.
Well, I just hope when we finally do get a chance to see JT Daniels, I just hope that we're not, and by we, I mean you, hyping him up again to a level that he's not going to be able to match, because we've already had a lot of that already this year, it would seem.
That's true. Good point.
All right, it's Cover 4 Live, presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. That's Mike Griffith. I'm Brandon Adams. It's Connor Riley, Jeff Sentell. We are here as well. Obviously, a lot going on with Georgia and Tennessee as you head towards the weekend. But I do want to pause here and talk about the rest of the SEC for a moment. We've seen some interesting stuff through 2 weeks in this league, and I want to give everybody a chance to sort of share their own hot take with what they've seen thus far through these first couple of weeks. Mike, I'll start with you since we were just talking about JT Daniels a moment ago. What jumps out to you out of the SEC here through a couple of weeks of play thus far this year?
Sam Pittman. I didn't think he had it in him, but he put it on Mississippi State. The old ball coach, Steve Spurrier, said that Barry Odom went to school and looked at what the Washington Huskies used to do to stop Mike Leach, and Arkansas ran the same coverage. And you know what, guys? Maybe that 37-10 win over Arkansas is going to look better as the year goes on, but Sam Pittman has proven to have been one hell of a coach, and I'll be honest, I didn't think he could do it, and he's already exceeded my expectations, and I'm happy for Sam Pittman.
Well, Connor, you know how I feel about Pittman, both in terms of the fact that I love seeing this happen for him. I'd be careful making too much out of one performance. I think they're probably in a little bit of trouble coming up this Saturday. But I think 5 years from now, Sam Pittman's still the head coach at Arkansas, and there are a lot of SEC coaches for whom I don't think you can say that about.
Wait, so you're telling me that you're not going to take the premature victory lap that I took last week with KJ Costello? Is that what you're telling me?
I'm going to try to be a little careful in that regard. But the Pittman story was certainly a fun one last week.
No, definitely. And I'm still all in on KJ Costello. One bad week does not deter me. I think the issues there might be more Mike Leach related than KJ related. But yeah, I eventually I thought he was going to be a good coach. I just did not expect it to be this soon, given some of the talent deficit there. So credit to him. Not only for getting that team ready to play, but for going out, getting a guy like Barry Odom, a head coach with experience to run his defense, a guy like Kendall Briles, who's a good enough, I think, strategic mind to make the most out of the talent there in Arkansas. If I had to go a hot take here, things are getting really interesting in Texas with Jimbo Fisher. I thought they'd cover last week. I thought they'd be competitive. They were anything but. And then this week, they welcome in a Florida team where the Texas A&M Aggies are a touchdown home underdog, something I don't think anybody expected in year 3 of Jimbo Fisher. I'm not saying he's going to get fired after this game, especially due to the economic circumstances surrounding his buyout, but he needs a win perhaps this weekend more badly than any other coach in college football, I believe, this weekend.
So I've followed this story kind of close because I do think Jimbo Fisher's a good coach, and I'm not ready to give up on that idea yet. I think you've got 2 distinct groups of Aggies fans right now. You've got what I might describe as a somewhat more casual fan who's just like ready to beat everybody and mad that they're not beating Alabama. You've also got another pocket of Aggies fans that I've kind of read some message board type posts from that'll say, well, the best record Texas A&M's had since it came to the SEC, I think, was 6-2. And I think you have to go back to 2012 to find them 6-2 in league play. That there's still a chance to have a pretty good season in a schedule that kind of eases up a little bit once you get past Florida this week. So there may be a pocket of Aggies fans who's actually a little bit more patient than you might think. But, I mean, as someone who has really touted for Jimbo Fisher, I'm going to tell you, you can't go out and play bad again this week when your only victory is a low-scoring slugfest against Vanderbilt. No competition really to speak of whatsoever against Alabama. This is a game I do think that A&M can stay close in. Obviously, I hate Florida. Maybe I'm just being biased. I think Mike Elko is a really good defensive coordinator. Mullen's typically been pretty good on the road in these spots. They don't get tripped up too much since he's been at Florida when they've been favored on the road. But this, to me, is a little bit of a last stand for Jimbo Fisher to show that he wants to be kind of a living, breathing part of this 2020 season, Connor.
Right. It's one thing to get blown out by Alabama. Alabama's going to blow out a lot of teams. It could theoretically blow out Georgia next week. But it's another thing when you factor in that Vanderbilt performance. And then if they struggle again against a Florida team that I believe Mullen and Fisher were hired the same years, and if they lose by 10-plus points, 2 touchdowns, etc., I think you're going to have to start asking a lot of really hard questions about why is this guy who's getting paid more than Dan Mullen, who has this reputation and I believe an actual track record of being a quote-unquote better recruiter than Dan Mullen, why is he getting beaten off the field by him? And it's a win this week doesn't cure everything, but it makes the rest of the season a lot easier. And a lot of those questions, I think, disappear with a big win this weekend.
Jeff, you got a hot take?
Yeah, let me go condescending, differing opinion here. I think so far the SEC is the league of the false positives. I'm not talking about, thankfully, not talking about false positive COVID tests. I'm talking about false positives for. I don't think Kyle Pitts in Florida are quite that good. I don't think he's a Heisman Trophy contender. I just don't think that anybody schemed him up with the type of athlete that can check him down the field. I also don't think that we had the early crowning moments for Mike Leach and that offense that came down to shoot a little bit. Here's what I think. I'm looking for validation, and I guess I will touch on the fact for all you bean counters out there that Jimbo Fisher still has 8 years and $60 million left on his buyout. Going to be pretty hard to do in a COVID furloughed economy and everything else like that. I'm going to say something simply this. I thought the most dynamic player in the conference coming into the year has been validated. And to me, he looks like the most dynamic player in the conference, and that's Jalen Waddle of Alabama. I can remember a story. And I think one of the things I like being on this, I think one of the things I like getting the chance to be down there on the sidelines, taking pictures and covering these games. And I remember Connor telling me a story. One of the first things he said when he saw Jalen Waddle up close and personal for the first time at Field View for the Georgia-Alabama game is he looked at me and he said, with kind of like Bugs Bunny eyes from a Looney Tunes cartoon, is he was like, Jalen Waddle is quite possibly the fastest human being I've ever seen with these two eyes. And he's only gotten better and faster. You add in his elements for the kick game. I think if Mike Griffith was covering Alabama right now, he would have nothing bad to say about Jalen Waddle, his explosive plays, his ability, or show me you breaking the ball across the middle. They probably say, I want to see him do it with some slot routes. I want to see him do it with some bumps.
All right, so since you bring that up, I'm going to give my hot take in a minute, but let's go across the board here. Jeff, I'll start with you and work my way across my little screen here. You think Georgia's ready to play with Alabama, possibly win that game in Tuscaloosa next Saturday? You don't have to give me your full breakdown of the game, just your early knee-jerk reaction. The players and coaches can't look ahead, but there's nothing saying that we can. We can't.
Yeah,
so,
I think that's just going to be what would we call it back in the day? Like a rock fight? I think that's going to be a game defensively where it's going to feel something like 20-17, 20-14, 21-17, that type of game. I don't think Georgia, with its young receiver core, especially going on the road, is really ready to beat Alabama yet, especially how well Mac Jones is playing right now. And, you know, Alabama's got all these players, and I do feel they have at least 3 to 4 legitimate first rounders on that squad. Mm-hmm. I think it's just going to be a great SEC football game. I still kind of believe what Mike said when he said there's no reason to play that game. Might be a very good reason for somebody to get a reading or some kind of way to just postpone that thing until the SEC championship game. Yes, Brandon, I do think Georgia's ready to play 4 quarters of football with Alabama, and I think it might be a one-possession game.
So it's interesting that you also say it's a low-scoring game. Very, very quickly, Jeff, as a response to this, you know, Georgia gave up 37 to LSU last season, 35 to Alabama the year before, 40 to Auburn the year before that. On the road against what has proven to be a high-powered offense thus far this season, is Georgia ready to shut down the Alabama offense?
Yeah, I think so, because I look at it about matchups. I say, who's going to sit there, and does Georgia have cornerback personnel, coverage personnel to hang with the Devonta Smith? I think they do. To hang with the Jalen Waddle, I think they do. Do they have pressure to make Mac Jones kind of look like Jake Fromm back there? I think when Georgia plays Alabama, they're going to give some of that some of that defensive game plan in terms of putting pressure on a non-mobile quarterback. And I know that's something I wonder if JT Daniels does come in and get reps and he has the big howitzer arm and he's driving the Ferrari like Magnum PI. I think people are going to wonder about Georgia not having a very mobile quarterback back there as well. I think that's one instance where Stetson Bennett's legs would help them in a game plan, because how do we affect a quarterback? You put pressure on him, make him make quick decisions, and that's always been a weakness for Mac Jones.
Mike, you think Georgia's ready for this thing next Saturday in Tuscaloosa?
I think the defense definitely is. I think Richard LeCounte is a guy. They had a question that, who's other than quarterback, what's the most important player in the league? And Richard LeCounte is that guy. Richard's an unbelievable playmaker. He makes up for so many mistakes. His run support, really bad call on him on that targeting. He hits him with a shoulder pad. I don't know what he was supposed to do, but I just think Richard is in store for a magical year. You guys know I've said that before. I think he means everything to Georgia. I think that the way he's able to get him aligned, I think the charisma, it was a wonderful sign that Christopher Smith was able to come in, but let's face it, Auburn's got problems, man. Auburn's got big problems. I don't know if Gus makes it after this year. That was not a spirited Auburn team. They couldn't play together. That was a bad Auburn team. But Richard's a special guy, and I think because of Richard, I think this defense can hold Alabama in check. I think he can hold them under 21 points. The question would be what's going to happen on offense, and I think this Tennessee game is going to be very important in many different ways as far as how this kaleidoscope offense shifts as it looks different with every personnel move in each quarter.
Connor, I disagree with both of our distinguished colleagues here. I think Georgia can win next Saturday, but I think it takes at least 30 points to do it. I don't think you're holding Alabama to 21 points in their own stadium. I just don't think you're doing that.
28 was the number I was going to throw out there. Is there a way for Georgia to sort of manufacture a way to get to that 28, to get to that 4 touchdown marker? And if you're able to do that, I think there is a chance, because I think when that Georgia defense plays that Alabama offense, the Thursday night last week between the Broncos and the Jets was an abomination. I believe next Saturday, Alabama, Georgia, when the Georgia defense is on the field and the Alabama offense is on the field, that'll look more like an NFL game than what we saw with Broncos Jets last week. But, we talked a little bit about the Georgia offense here and what they're looking for. One thing I'm sneaky kind of interested in seeing this weekend is how Lane Kiffin's offense at Ole Miss does against this Alabama defense. Now, granted, they're not running the same thing. Lane Kiffin's running sort of an offense similar to what Art Briles used to run at Baylor there, sort of one read and go. It doesn't matter. We're just looking to look to score. I think if Ole Miss is able to have some success against this Alabama defense, which I think that they might, I think that opens the door a little bit. But ultimately, while yes, Georgia, I think certainly could win a 17-14 game or 20-14 game, ultimately, I think Georgia needs to look to score in the 28s and 30s if they're going to have a realistic chance of winning this game, which I think that they possibly could.
Quick hot take for me, then I want to take some comments before we get out of here. I think it's undeniably true. The SEC East is better than the SEC West right now. I don't know when the last time that was true, but there are 3, I would say 2 weeks is a small sample size, but there are 3 good teams at least in the SEC East between Georgia, Florida, and I think the Tennessee through 2 weeks has actually been pretty impressive. I don't know that there are 3 good teams in the SEC West at the moment. I would say that the East through 2 weeks has been better than the West. Gentlemen, any response to that?
For a question, a follow-up for you, is that because of coaching or is it because of talent? Because I think right now, if you're doing your coaching ranking list, yes, I know Ed Orgeron won a national title last year, but Nick Saban is still number 1. But 2, 3, and 4, I might believe, all reside in the East right now. That's
interesting. I mean, I definitely think that. Look, I hate to say this because it's not like right now we want to hate Tennessee because that's who Georgia's playing on Saturday. The honest truth is I do have some respect for the way that Jeremy Pruitt's building that program. I've said for years that over the course of the long haul, Pruitt at Tennessee is a more substantial problem for Georgia than Dan Mullen at Florida, that the way Pruitt's building it at Tennessee is the kind of thing that 3 or 4 years from now, if the game's not fully circled right now, it could be really, really circled by then. Yeah. I think by comparison, Dan Mullen is just not quite as substantive of a program builder. So, yeah, if you want to describe that as coaching, then I do think that Pruitt's making a big impact. Mike, you got
I just feel like he's building the team the right way. He's building it from the inside out. That's just the way you do football. I can't say that you would say that about what Mullen's doing at Florida and that program, trying to get high-profile transfers. Speaking of, I can't believe we've had Cade May's thoughts dominate the airwaves tonight, and nothing about young Brenton Cox as well coming in here with a thought or two. I like Mike's line he had as like one rivalry game at a time, brother. We're going to work on Tennessee, Georgia this week, and we're going to get to that one later.
All right, since you brought it up, I'll say something, and Mike, actually, Mike, you take the floor. You haven't talked in a while. What'd you think of Brenton Cox this week?
Well, I mean, I would answer your hot take by saying limited sample size, but I think the East is making a case, and I think they've made a case the last 2 years. As far as Brenton Cox, maybe a kid that didn't understand that just because you're talking to a Florida reporter doesn't mean it's not going to get back to Georgia. Listen, I understand Brenton Cox. This is a guy that had to sit out a year. Nobody changed the rules for him. If he would have transferred to Tennessee, they would have got the rule change for him a year earlier, because that's what they do. They hire lawyers and get politicians involved and bring it up at their press conferences, and the media makes it an issue when it's not an issue. But kudos to Tennessee for getting that rule changed in the middle of the season. It didn't happen at Florida. There were no rule changes, and Brenton Cox had to sit out an entire year. I think he thought he was going to be able to play. Usually his coaches will lie about things like that. And he's playing well, right? He's leading Florida in sacks, and he's a guy that needed a fresh start. Things didn't go well for him here. He got off on the wrong foot with some of his older teammates. He had a misdemeanor arrest for possession of marijuana charge with Robert Beal. He was publicly reprimanded running stadium stairs in front of boosters. That's a lot for a local 5-star. And then he had to leave his state, leave home to go play at Florida. And he's fought hard to get that number 1 jersey. And I think he spoke from the heart. I don't think he was trying to, be ugly or anything like that. I think he was asked a question, and I think he answered it. I think it will be personal for him. I think he does want to help Florida beat Georgia. That's why they got him. And, it's kind of like timing. Georgia fans are kind of like just kind of looking for somebody to get mad at, because that's what you do when you're Georgia and you got a rivalry game, or I don't know, Jeff says a non-rivalry game against Tennessee, but Georgia fans are in a fighting mood right now. They don't want to go 7-3 like Jeff said they might go. They want to win it all. So, they're fired up. Brenton Cox lit the fuse.
Philip Beck on YouTube doesn't think we're taking enough comments. Let me move from our cover 4 into cover more. Let's take some questions and comments on the way out the door here. Bank 6 says Georgia will beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa because of special teams, and Scott Cochran will get the game ball. That would be fun. Yeah, listen, I don't want to do too – people are going to start yelling if we do too much Alabama talk out of the Tennessee game, but I will entertain Bank 6 comment here. If Georgia goes out there and they're covering kicks left and right, blocking stuff, if Scott Cochran left Tuscaloosa the game ball, I would be about as happy as a human being possibly could be.
I'm trying to think of a funeral comment joke here, but nothing's coming to mind. I'm not that great of a joke writer, but the Scott Cochran story is going to be very interesting. I think Saban's going to get asked about it a couple of times next week, just given didn't seem he was all that thrilled about the move, and some of the stuff Alabama's put out there about Cochran after the fact says there might still be a little salt in the wound there. So I'm like the commenter there said, I'm very interested in how Scott Cochran factors into that Georgia-Alabama game next week.
Yeah, I think what Saban says about Cochran will be very, very interesting. I'm not gonna lie to you. I didn't like some of the things that Saban kind of said when he, hired the guys that he brought in to run that, part of the program after Scott Cochran left. I think what Saban says next week could be very, very interesting. My guess is he probably just tries to deflect, but if he chooses not to, that could get pretty interesting all the way around. Drayton Wilson says there's something to be said with just wearing an opponent down. Our depth is unreal. I mean, there are right now few SEC teams that can really rival that. It's going to matter as we get later into the season. And by the way, the one thing I still won't let go of is the notion that it seems very likely to me that 2 SEC teams making the college football playoff. So what happens for Georgia over the back half of the season once the long stretch of very difficult games in the front half is done, I think that still matters, and I think that depth probably comes into play right there. Chad Williams praising Barry Odom for the work that he did last week against Mississippi State. Mike, I know you brought up Pittman earlier. How impressed were you with Odom's work there as the defensive coordinator?
I thought he was a good coach at Missouri too. I really did. And to do it with guys, let's face it, the personnel at Arkansas probably, well, definitely, isn't on par with a lot of schools. But after what Mississippi State did to LSU in week one, it was jaw dropping to see what Arkansas did against that offense.
Connor, Ken Feinberg brings this up. How much do you think Georgia's missing, or maybe not, Dominic Blaylock right now?
With how Kyrus played last week, they're not. If Kyrus gives them that every week, or maybe not that every week, but something similar to that, where more so than yards and catches, he's the guy going over, making the tough catch on third down. He's the guy that sort of Stetson looks for and finds running across the field open. If Kyrus is able to continuously give you that, look, I said this on Tuesday on my show, as much as I love and appreciate and hype up Dominic Blaylock, he never played a good game as Kyrus Jackson did last week. So if Kyrus keeps on doing what he's doing, the loss of Dominic Blaylock will not be all that much felt.
Jeff, Trey Droughty brings up Caden Mays again. Your best guess here. How much of a game day storyline do you think Mays is? Do you think there's a moment during the game where there is? Because Mays, even in a Georgia uniform, would play to the echo of the whistle. So him pushing and shoving after a play, he'd do that against any opponent. But there's a chance if he does it on Saturday, it just gets noticed more because he's playing against his old school. Do you think there will be a moment on Saturday where we're all talking about Cade Mays for something that happens either for the good or the bad on the field?
I think I'd be disappointed if it is, because I know what you're saying, Brandon. Cade Mays, throughout his whole career, even in high school at Knoxville Catholic, he was the guy that would be the guy jumping on piles, the guy that was ready to bounce somebody out of the club, certain stretches of the game. Here's what I hope happens. I don't know if everybody noticed it as well as I did or what most did, but I kind of saw a lot of the Georgia team kind of break rank and support Cade, at least socially on Twitter through all this. Always supporting him, always, praying for him, free Cade Mays. And then also when he finally got cleared, I would love to see that edge of chippiness of Cade Mays' game just kind of dissolve a little bit. Now he's going to play hard. He's going to be tough. He's going to be a competitor, but I would be disappointed if Cade went after, he catches the right tackle spot. I think that's where he played 67 out of 74 snaps last week. Wanya Morris will be on the left side, so that'll be a lot of looks against Nolan Smith, maybe Jermaine Johnson or Adam Anderson if those guys are healthy. I'd love to hear the beat writers talk to me about what they're hearing about Jermaine Johnson for this Saturday. But the other side will be Wanya Morris versus Azeez Ojulari a lot. And, I just hope Cade shows that respect, that those are a lot of his guys. I know Isaiah Wilson's not there on the team anymore, but there are a lot of those guys on that team. I can remember how instrumental Jamari Salyer was in, his conversion to a Georgia Bulldog quickly after he decommitted from Tennessee. I'd like to see Cade Mays play hard, play very physical football, but not kind of walk the edge that he's normally done so far in his career.
We're wrapping up here, but Connor, the internet said that Cade Mays didn't play very well against Missouri last week. You think there's a chance that Mays has a bad day on Saturday?
I certainly do. One, just given the talent that we saw in this Georgia defense a week ago, but two, I asked D-Rob about this yesterday of how that first year was when you were granted eligibility so late in the process. And he admitted he had taken a few months off from football and wasn't necessarily training as hard as he should have been. And I think there's certainly an adjustment where you have to go from zero, from thinking I'm not going to play, to 110 miles an hour really, really quickly. And that is a difficult adjustment. We saw it last week against Missouri. And look, I'm not exactly the world's most fittest guy, but I do know it's going to take some time for you to really totally get back into that football playing shape. So it wouldn't surprise me if Cade certainly does come out and show some rust and some struggle this week against a very dominant Georgia defense.
All right, Mike, let me finish with this because Real Cage brings this up. Now, the truth is, I partially agree with you. I think that JT Daniels is definitely still going to be heard from this year, and would not surprise me by the end of the season, Daniels isn't playing a lot of snaps for Georgia. But Real Cage essentially asks it this way. What would it take for you to start to view Stetson Bennett as the quarterback for the Georgia Bulldogs? What would he have to do to earn your respect?
Grow 3 inches and add about 10 miles an hour on his football throwing speed. Look, guys, there's a reason, that he was a 4-string quarterback. Kirby Smart's not a dummy, and neither is Todd Monken. These guys evaluate quarterbacks and players for a living. There's a reason why he didn't have any other SEC offers. Listen, the guy is playing great. He's running this offense efficiently and effectively. It's a great story. He's got good mobility. He maximizes his skills, but ultimately in the SEC, the cream rises to the top. This ain't Rudy, right? And at some point, you're going to run up against a defense that can take those throws away from Stetson, and they're going to force you to go over the top, and they're going to force you to throw the deep out. And you've either got the steam on your fastball to make that throw or you don't. And when you don't, it's pick six the other way, or it's 5 yards underthrown and the receiver slows down and catches it falling backwards instead of running into the end zone like we saw happen with Kyrus Jackson. If that's a 10-10 game, I don't think everybody's going, oh, that's okay. If there's a fumble on the next, you're going, my gosh, that cost us 7 points. Georgia hasn't been in a game like that yet. We'll have this conversation after the Alabama game, and we'll see where it's at. If Stetson goes out and beats Alabama, well, then by golly, I guess he really is the real deal.
Okay, so let's not quite get there yet, though. Let's say that he plays well again Saturday. And I told you before, we've seen SEC quarterbacks have a hard time doing it 2 weeks in a row this year. Bennett faces a tough task to play as well this week as he did a week ago. If he does play that well again, wouldn't you have to say he deserves to start the game against Alabama if he plays against Tennessee the way he played against Auburn?
If the other team's only scoring 6 points, how good do you got to play? He was 17 to 28 for 240 yards.
That sounds like a good
17
game to
to
me.
28 for 240 yards, and people will be talking about how bad Jake. Look at what Georgia was doing last year when their offense was effective.
That many games like that last year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to want to drag Jake Fromm here, but yeah, Fromm didn't come close to playing that well hardly ever last year. In fact, that's like 2 games worth of stats.
I'm sorry, did you miss the Florida game? And that was a much better Florida team than Auburn. He was 17 of 28 against a team that didn't score a touchdown. He hasn't been asked to do a lot other than run the offense. Sooner or later, he will run up against a defense where he's going to have to do more than throw an 8-yard pass to Kyrus Jackson in the flats. When your slot guy is catching 9 passes and your premier receiver on the perimeter is only getting 2, that's a red flag that your guy can't make that throw. Because if he could, he would make it. Now, we'll see if Tennessee allows Georgia to throw underneath. I know this, if you miss too many more throws over the middle over a 6'7" John Fitzpatrick, that's going to get somebody warming up in the bullpen. I don't know how ready JT is, BA, but I know this. There's a reason that Todd Monken went and got him, and there's a reason that he came here. And there's a reason he was ahead of Stetson on the depth chart before they determined he couldn't play in the opener.
Jeff, can you do me a favor? Would you buy Mike a Stetson hat? Can we get Mike a big Stetson cowboy hat? I mean, come on.
I like the guy personally, though. That's
hey, guys, let's figure this out. If Stetson goes 2-0 over the next 2 weeks, and now I satisfy Brandon by us talking about the Tennessee game as well as the Alabama game, Mike Griffith has to wear a Stetson hat on at least a month's worth of Cover 4 lives. Let's make that happen. I want to say one thing, and I think I don't know, like, listen, I've seen all these guys at their best, their prospect heights where they flash with everything, and I just don't know if we're chasing a mirror, an image, an illusion of what JT Daniels could potentially be rather than what he is right now. I saw that ball Stetson threw against that 4 yards to the pylon he threw to George Pickens. I don't know if a lot of quarterbacks in the SEC can make that throw. And I want to go back to one other play. I think it's maybe the first snap of the game. I think it's Big Cat Bryant. Auburn is coming charging in. Stetson wheels around, throws the ball, makes a play, actually an out route out towards the boundary with a little bit of those RPMs that Mike likes to see on his little bit of velo on his ball. Mike, I don't know if the Alabama quarterback can make that throw. The Florida quarterback can't make that play. The Tennessee quarterback can't make that play. That was a big-time SEC play there for Stetson.
Yeah, I think the New Orleans Saints are on the phone, Jeff. They see the next Drew Brees.
So we'll have to leave it there for today because we're running over time here on our Cover 4 Live presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. We appreciate the comments. I mean, I guess one thing I'll say to kind of wrap things up is that I'm as surprised by anybody about what you saw last Saturday. But I think at a certain point in time, the results have to speak for themselves, and then we will see how long those results last. And thankfully, Georgia's got a lot of potential options at a number of positions, quarterback included, if it's called upon and needed as the season progresses. You can read plenty from Mike Griffith, Jeff Sendell at DogNation.com, Connor Riley as well. Jeff will join me tomorrow on Dog Nation Daily One of the things we'll get into for sure, less than a week out from Amarius Mims making his college decision. Obviously, the two teams that will play on Saturday have factored heavily into Mims' recruitment. No doubt that'll be a fun storyline to address as part of our program tomorrow, and some really good stuff from Jeff over the course of the last couple of days on guys like Nyland Green and obviously Smile Mondon. We'll do a lot of that with you tomorrow on Dog Nation Daily. We thank all of you for being here on Cover 4 Live tonight, presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. Enjoy the game here this weekend. Stay close to Dog Nation on both the website and the video channels for all of your UGA news. And we will look forward to seeing you again here next week at the same time for Cover 4 Live.